All right, everybody, welcome to Dojo Talks. Today we're talking about spaced repetition. In the literature, it's sometimes called the spacing effect. And this is part of our series of topics in Ben Johnson's recent book, Perpetual Chess Improvement, where last time, we are addressing the topics in the book where there's been disagreement amongst the many guests he's had about whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. And last time we talked about endgames, and some people thought you could miss leg day. We had a discussion on that, you know. So today we're talking about this spacing effect thing, and I just wanted to frame it in a context, let's say outside of chess, because this thing, the spacing effect, is a psychological topic that pertains not just to chess players. Okay, so this is my layman's understanding of it. Uh, almost, I'm sure all three of us went to school and did things like physics class, chemistry class, math class, and there was this systematized chapter by chapter thing where you learn like one little part of the subject, and then you go on to the next chapter and you get another little subject. The problem is, unless you repeat what you did in that chapter, you're going to lose it. That's the idea. And so the idea of the spacing effect is you need to go back to chapter one and do chapter one again. And they've done a lot of tests on this, this whole STEM education, there's a lot of research, blah, blah, blah. And I think, for at least to my layman's understanding, it really does translate well to chess. In chess, you have patterns, you have concepts, right? You have thinking skills. All of these things are similar to, let's say, learning math or physics or whatever you want to call it. So, what we thought we would do, we're going to talk about a lot of stuff in the show. We're going to talk about the Dojo training program, if we need to do more space repetition. But we are going to begin by just doing a round of, let's call it, anecdotal evidence from our own chess lives of how, or if not, maybe not, we have experienced benefits from space repetition. Let's start with David, because I know he's always the ogre on these questions.
Okay. I'll start with a little quibble with apologies to you, Jesse, but
Uh-huh.
um, that framing of like if you don't repeat it, you're guaranteed to forget everything, that seemed a little bit stark or extreme,
Okay.
right? Like I I don't think the question here is does space repetition let you remember everything, and without space repetition you lose everything? That seems like too extreme, no?
Okay.
Or like what's at stake?
Well, I should, okay, let me reframe it, that you will have a greater likelihood of unlearning what you did unless you repeat it
Yeah.
and repeat it more than once.
Yeah. Um Yeah, and one thing that I have experienced outside of chess is that when I was teaching at a middle school a few years ago, there was a new science teacher who came in and he had a science curriculum for 3 years. And the way he had it set up was what he calls sort of like an upward spiral, where you cover these topics, but you come back around them at a higher level again and again
Mm-hmm.
over the course of the years. Um, and he said that was like a very modern approved way to do science curriculums
Mm-hmm.
or
Hmm.
curricula, sorry, at
Right.
that sort of age bracket. Um, from my own experience, everybody's memory, well, not everybody, but people's memories tend to operate somewhat differently, right? So for somebody, repeating things a bunch is going to help. For other people, it's going to depend whether they read it or listened to it or wrote it down themselves or turned around and taught it to another person is a technique that I've seen help a lot of people to remember things, right? So there's all kinds of different things that I think work better or worse for different people. So I would be surprised for almost any technique if it had a uniform benefit for all students. And I can imagine there are some people with some kind of memory where they, hear or see things once, and then it's just in, and repetition would just be a waste for some of those people. Some people benefit from taking notes, some people don't. Some people do or don't consult their notes, right? But somehow it helps to take the notes, even if they never consult it. Um, in my own chess, I've found a benefit to repetition when it comes to learning end games and opening ideas primarily, not tactics or middle games, sometimes remembering full games. I sometimes like to learn things by having like these full games memorized, uh, like classic games. And last year, when we did all those greatest games of chess history, I tried to memorize all of our games of chess history.
Mhm.
Um, and I memorized like 10 or 15 of them, and then I would check, a week or two later if I knew them or not, just trying to add to my vocabulary, also because it's useful as a teacher. Um, and I find the repetition is definitely helpful for me from remembering some of those kinds of things, for me personally.
Okay. Coast.
So yeah, I mean, for me, it feels like repetition, spaced repetition. It feels like a big part in learning new things, like learning anything pretty much. Like the first time you do it, it's always very slow and mechanical, and then you have to repeat a couple of times, and you have to repeat a couple of times quickly. Like if I'm, I don't know, playing like a video game or something, and there are some new mechanics or some keyboard stuff, it's like I'm gonna be looking at the keyboard as I try to like play the game, and eventually I do it a little more and more, and I get a little bit faster and quicker with it. So I feel like the spaced repetition, it's just a very typical thing. Like I don't know, even growing up learning times tables or like addition, you would do a lot of like the same problems over and over again just to kind of make sure that you understood what you were doing. And when it comes to chess, it makes a lot of sense. I think for a lot of people, it's kind of synonymous with chessable, but I mean, I feel like it's actually much broader than that because I think it's not just chessable. Chessable is like one way of doing it. And I think chessable definitely has like its issues, like could be improved and stuff. And there's different ways of repeating your material than just using the site. So one thing I often suggest is for people to store model games. So games that they find interesting or useful, especially for like their openings or structures that they play, to just store them in like a study or a database somewhere and then review them from time to time. And it's not about like memorizing the game, but just about like seeing it every once in a while, like every couple of months or so, and like reminding yourself of the ideas. I feel like that's super useful. Just seeing the game, and then once you play through a couple of times, you might even remember like a key idea, like, all right, this was the game where there was sacrifice or like interesting move, and you definitely won't remember the full game, but you'll at least have like some recollection. I think that really helps you when it comes to spotting ideas in your own games. So yeah, like David said, I think it's most useful for repeating openings and endgames, especially endgames. I think that's a big thing for me. It's like so much more useful to play out an endgame and do it over the board several times than to go through it in a book. So I think just repeating that endgame, and that was a big part of my training, was like I would try to hold some endgame like over the board in blitz by hand, against a strong player. And that's what proves that you can kind of do it, is if you can just do that multiple times. We have that in the program as well. Like a lot of our end game algorithms, you got to do it 3 times successfully in a row without messing up, which I think is important. So yeah, to me, it makes a lot of sense that chess learning would be affected by this thing because it feels quite popular in basically everything else.
Mhm. Yeah, so I'll say first, for me, what's interesting is it's really a kind of a novel thing. And it's not just science books, but the chess books of the past also kind of built up in a chapter by chapter way, not revisiting. I think most chess books still do that, basically. They're trying to build you up and it gets higher and higher, but you don't really revisit a lot of the stuff that you then learn at the beginning. In my own experience, I want to say a couple things. I think the biggest one in chess was the Polgar mates. And I discovered that really by chance because I was using it to teach kids. And kind of like Proust, I had an attitude about it. I was like, oh, I'm an I don't need to do these. And I realized that by repeating them and then really getting into it myself, by repeating them with like by teaching and then doing it myself, got to be this really instant visualization joy that I could see things at the end of a line much faster than I was able to before. And then repeating it really, every couple of years I would do that book, the Polgar Mate book, and right, it would just get cleaner and cleaner and faster and faster. And I didn't realize at the time that I was doing some woodpecker or spaced repetition thing. I had no idea. I was just like, oh, this is cool, cool challenge. I'm obviously getting a benefit from it, you know. So that was an interesting example. I definitely agree with endgames. I think we'll talk about openings when we talk about chessable stuff. And I want to stress from my own personal experience outside of chess that there was in hindsight, a big disappointment with especially me learning like advanced math calculus stuff, where we would go through some chapter and it would be difficult. And at the end of that chapter, I'd do the problems and I would say to myself, okay, I kind of sort of get it. But you're new to whatever material. You don't actually get it. You might just be like barely clinging on to getting this new concept, right? And then what happens? Well, you're instantly thrown into the next chapter, which generally doesn't even have much to do with the chapter before it in terms of like, it's hard in math to build off things in some precise way, right? So then we wouldn't go back, and then my frail understanding just wouldn't be solidified, right? And then I would basically become atrophied and lost. So I think that to me is a really good indication of how it's got to be similar in the chess world, right? And so that's where I really get a lot of the impetus of like, yes, it makes sense. I think we can argue a little bit about how it should work. I think that's a very special question, but that it is a thing, at least both statistically, what the research are saying, and then also something I've experienced in my own life, I definitely think it's true. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Okay, so should we get into the specifics?
Sure.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, I feel like as it relates to chess, you have Chessable with the openings, but they also have all kinds of books on tactics, strategy, end games, and so on. I guess we alluded to this already, but yeah, for me, I feel like when it comes to the openings, the best thing for me when it for memorization is actually playing moves out over the board. And I feel like we talked about this at some point, right. But I find playing the moves out with my own hand much more effective for remembering it later OTB compared to just studying it on Chessable or like going back and forth in ChessBase. I would say the hierarchy is like just looking at the moves on the computer is like the lowest level. Then playing it out OTB is the next level. Then sparring it is one level above that. And then having like a classical game in an opening line, that would be the ultimate level where it's like, okay, if I have a classical game in a line, I'm going to remember a lot of details about it for months, possibly. For endgames, I find it quite useful as well. Actually, maybe more useful than the openings part. Endgames, I feel like it's all about reps. Yeah.
Before you go on, can I ask you something about how spaced repetition works on Chessable, potentially with opening? Mm-hmm. Like, does it have a prescribed spacing? Like, does it tell you, like, it's been 2 months since you practiced these lines? Like, does it test you on them? Does it test you more on lines that you got wrong some previous time it tested you? Or does it just sort of, like, ask you to go through everything? Or do you just go in and repeat whatever you want to work on?
I think they switch it up, but in general, yeah, you're on like a schedule that they put you on. There's some kind of default schedule where you got to repeat stuff. First, like it's kind of more frequent, like every day, then maybe every couple of days once you've done it a couple of times. And then, yeah, in terms of like, I think if you get stuff wrong, I think they usually put that up front, or they have a feature where you can let's say, study those specific positions or lines that you're worse at, basically. So I think you have some control over how you do it, but I think they basically space it for you.
They have a default that's designed to be sort of an intelligent version of it.
Yeah, and they have
Right,
yeah, very
and for those of you who haven't done, I guess David is one of them, like you're supposed to, just like the spacing gets further and further out. So let's say you do it, then you repeat it in 2 hours, then you do it the next day, then you do it the next day, and then you can skip days as after it's been, let's say, concretized, right?
Mhm.
And then the whole gimmick, of course, of chessable is to get you coming back again and again to not lose this magical knowledge and also the points you've gained in doing the process.
you just got to keep doing it. Yeah, there's a very helpful avatar of John Bartholomew that's like, you've got 400 moves left to review today, boss. Get to it. You got 600 moves tomorrow and 800 moves Wednesday if you don't do any work. So you better hurry it up. And yeah, it gets you going. Now, okay, when it comes to woodpecker method, I feel like there's definitely a lot of debate. And Ben Johnson, in his book, we were just looking at it, he seems to be very much on the fence if this kind of spaced repetition thing is useful for tactics training and calculation, which is definitely, I think, a really natural question. From what I read in the book, seems like Ben kind of presents both sides, but is more like, seems like he's more skeptical of it than a believer. My whole feeling, we talked about this a lot, so people can find I did like a YouTube video on this and everything, but I did the woodpecker method in full. I mean, I definitely feel like it helped my tactics. And for me, the big thing is that it just gives people a way to do a lot of good chess work in a very accountable and straightforward fashion. You do let's say 7 sets, you solve the same exercises over and over again. So it could be 300 problems, could be 500, 1,000, whatever. You do 7 sets of just solving those problems over and over again. You try to solve them faster and more accurately each time you go through the set. And so it just gives you a very easy and straightforward way to kind of track your progress, and you do a lot of tactics in the meantime. And yeah, if someone did that same thing, but mixed up their tactics and did just as much work, I think that would also be just as good. I don't know if there's anything special about the woodpecker method. I feel like it probably has to be tested more, but to me, it's just such an easy win. It's just you get this book, it's got a bunch of good problems in it, and then it gives you a simple method to track your progress. You do the work, you get better at calculation, you then do it with another book, and so on and so forth. So I feel like there's a lot of intangible advantages that come with it.
I mean, you say easy win, but I guess the potential knock would be that when you're repeating it, you might be wasting your time.
Yeah,
and you could have already moved on to the next book, right? That would be the counter argument or whatever.
That's the only counter. But to me, it's not clear whether it's more helpful to do the woodpecker method in full, or if it's better to do let's say 3 tactics books with the same number of problems but differing problems. But I feel like with the woodpecker method, it's you're just put on this path to finish. Whereas if you're just doing random books, I think many people have the experience where they start something, they don't finish it, they get through half of it or a third of it, and it's just I don't know. I think a lot of people have issues where they just don't finish stuff. So I don't know. It's nice. It's nice where just the book is a bit practical, where it just sets you off on this track. Because once you start the woodpecker method, it's you have to finish it. You can't just quit halfway through. You got to get through it, and so you end up doing a ton of work. So
why wouldn't you be able to stop midway through that book, but you can through other books?
Well, because it's just you're on this trajectory already, and it's you finish the first cycle, then it's all right, I got to do cycle 2. You do cycle 2, and then you're on the third cycle, and then this might be the time where you quit another book. But it's why would you quit? It's all right, now I'm in this third cycle. It's just very easy to follow. Once you do 15 days of a 30-day program, it's just you're it's inertia, right? It's just physics. An object in motion stays in motion.
Easy to follow. You just turn the page after you've read a page. It's not mysterious where to go.
Most people have this experience where you just lose motivation. You miss one day because you were too busy that day, and then it's you have nothing calling you to do the next day, and then so many books just left on the shelf, unread.
My guess would be you're better off reading three tactics books once than one tactic book three times. And I will say from my own experience, where I have forgotten opening lines or model games or forgotten some kind of technique or method for, queen versus rook or some end games of that kind of difficulty level, and then repeating it helps bring it back. But I don't really have any experience of having solved a tactic and then someone shows me the tactic again 2 years later, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I've completely forgotten how to do this tactic. Pretty much, if I've solved it once, I can solve it again.
Mhm. Um, I'd like to revisit the Chessable for a second. So with the openings, here's some of the problems that I've encountered with it. Now, by the way, Ben Johnson is kind of like, when in his book, he's kind of like saying openings for sure, tactics, maybe not. But the openings, I think it's very delicate. And so I'm just going to sketch out a couple of the problems I've encountered as a user of Chessable, and also as somebody who's done Chessable courses. So first of all, if whether you created the course yourself or you are following somebody else's course, a lot of the moves will have been created by an engine. So even, yeah, it doesn't, some engine will have shown the originator of the course, whether it's you or somebody else, some move, and it's going to be kind of whack. Like at first you might think you get it, but your human mind is going to be like, I don't know, man. I don't know if this move actually makes sense. And those moves are real tricky because you can memorize them, but a lot of times the human mind won't actually understand them. And if you don't understand them, then it's going to be really hard when it comes to the game, because your mind, your hand, like they're playing a classical game, you're like, my hand remembers like this weird move, but do I really even want to do it? Do I get it? And if you don't get it, you'll doubt yourself. You'll be like, maybe that wasn't the move, really, you know? So that's the problem with a lot of openings, and that goes for, the whole gamut, even 2,700 plus players, maybe even especially them, because they are, using these computer lines and they get really wacky. And it's very hard for the human mind to appreciate what the computer's saying.
Yeah, I think
Okay,
they're
so
reviewing their stuff all the time, and the amount that they're trying to re-access
all right,
is far more than what any of the rest of us do. So, like, how
right.
memory works for them is even more important than for any of us.
Mm-hmm. Then also, one of the things with Chessable that, two more things that confuse me about Chessable is, uh, the only way it really works for me is when I do a line and whenever I go back, that I start from move one. What Chessable likes to do for its algorithm is to throw you into some position that you got wrong before. But I
Mhm.
don't know, they'll just show me some complicated position. And the funny thing is, sometimes I can remember the sequence from that position, but I have no idea how to get to that position. So I'm like
Mhm.
memorizing the sequence from, the move 18 or whatever, but I have no idea how to get to move 18.
Yeah, which is not
You need
typical because
everything
you would
really
never.
connected.
Yeah.
So that's a problem. And the other thing with Chessable that's, I think, important with conceptual stuff is, okay, so I created this course, Aggressive Repertoire for White according to Dojo. And I really tried to be philosophical, in the sense that, like, we're not just doing computer moves, we are following a conceptual idea of how we're going to start our attack. And then what happens though is, first of all, what I like about Chessable is you have the ability to explain yourself in video form. And I think for openings, it's very good to do like a video presentation to like explain what's going on. Yes, you can write it out, but speaking it is so much clearer. And so I was really worked hard on my delivery in the video to make it really crystal clear what the ideas were. But then it makes sense. Not everybody's going to buy the video because the video costs a lot more. So then what happens is then people do without the video, and then I see in the comments from their questions that they haven't actually watched the video and haven't understood what the conceptual basis of a lot of the stuff is we're doing. And what did they do? They turned on their engine. And I was like, I'm totally confused here, cry, blah, blah, blah. So that's not only just a knockabout chessable, but it's like the memorizing process has to be accompanied by some kind of conceptual understanding when it comes to the opening, right? With tactics, there's a lot of like patterns. I would call that a lot of pattern recognition. With the openings, I feel like if you're going to be good at openings, you need a conceptual understanding of what you were doing.
Well, Jesse, you're saying has to be accompanied. I feel like the
Yeah,
conceptual understanding, I mean, that's like the starting point. Before you can play any opening, you have to understand, like,
fair,
I
fair.
would,
I totally agree with
even
you.
before you get into, like the move by move.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, that's kind of the trap of chessable, is because a lot of people, they're like, they don't know what to do in the opening. They feel lost. They're like, I just need a plan for the first couple moves and then I'll be good. And then they try to like memorize stuff. But yeah, I mean, most games, they, especially at lower levels, they'll deviate from the opening very quickly from whatever you've studied on chessable. Especially at lower levels, usually most games are like e4, e5, knight f3, queen e7, and then it's like, okay, white has to continue from there. So yeah, it feels like, yeah, it's kind of this emphasis on memorization rather than understanding, which I think would be nice to adjust.
And one of the things we've tried to do, I don't know how successful we've been, but we've tried to introduce this idea of sparring positions. So in our repertoires, and also if you're in the dojo, we say if you have your own repertoire, you have to identify what the key positions are. Just some basic tabias. The tabia just means a position you're going to get again and again. And then to play it out for a little bit, talk about it with your opponent. And that is a great way, I think, to get a conceptual understanding, to get a grip on like, okay, this is kind of the dynamic of this position. So we've tried that, but that's all honestly, that's been a whole tale of woe because it's hard for people to get together. It's hard for people to understand when to stop the sparring. We have our own challenges there. But I think like I like what you were saying, Kosi, about the hierarchy of understanding.
Mhm.
And right, sparring and then talking about it is the way up there. And then I totally agree, like a classical game and then talking about it afterwards, maybe at a postmortem. Absolutely. And I'll say, actually, just in terms of openings, if you want to, I really believe if you want to get good at an opening, you got to play a bunch of classical games in it and then analyze those games and think about what's going on. You won't get a conceptual understanding like instantly. You might have a glimmer, but you're not going to get like a deep sense of how a position works, not for a while,
Yeah,
in experience anyway.
I think people are going to ask about blitz. I feel like blitz is also helpful for
Mhm.
reps, but you really have to like reflect on it. So ideally, if you play blitz and then don't review the games, I think it's like almost useless. But if you play blitz and then you actually like review after every game, like, oh, I went wrong at this move, I had to play this instead, or I didn't know what to do against this idea, and then you like analyze it, even for it's like just like a minute or two, then I think that's, you can definitely get a lot of value from that.
Should we move on to the next part?
All right.
Let me read you guys what our repetition currently is. Now, when we did this at the dojo, we weren't actually thinking too strongly about spaced repetition. We just knew that if there were certain things that you would have to repeat, we didn't have, or at least I didn't have that word in my mind when we created this. And so I'm going to read what our repetitions are, and then maybe we can debate it. Definitely, maybe we could even think on the basis of this discussion to increase the repetition. So this is what we got. So for our opening requirements, we say you got to repeat those after 1 year. There's different opening requirements for different levels. The higher rated you are, the more openings we say you have to do. Endgame algorithms. We say after a year, buddy, you got to do that again, right? And what are the actually, and Kosti mentioned this, one of the great things about the endgame algos is we usually have three positions of a certain kind, and you have to win each of those 3 times in a row. So there's a repetition built in at the beginning, but then you have to do it again after a year. And maybe we could say even those got to be, you know, sooner. That could be an argument. Like I
Yeah.
think
So
actually, if we had the chessable model, it would be like, okay, you did this position, boss, and now we need you to do it again pretty quickly.
yeah, like to make it clear for people. So these are tasks in the program, and normally when you complete a task, it gets checked off, and you get points for that. get this dojo score. But yeah, we have it now baked into the site that if you do something, there's an expiration date on it, which does make sense. Yeah, if you study, like Lucina Endgame one time, and then you don't study for like months and months and months after that, then yeah, you're basically just gonna not know how to do it at a certain point. And yeah, I think I feel like maybe it should be even more faster than we have it now. Because the way we have it now, it's like an intense repetition. You got to basically do it like 6 to 9 times basically, and then after a year. But it could be much more different.
And let me just finish off reading this out. So let's say the Polgar mates, you got to do those every 3 years. And so, for example, where at the top you have to do the whole book basically, right? At the bottom, there's going to be less of those. But if if you were in that same rating band, hadn't done them, you would have to go back in 3 years. Say Puzzle Rush, Personal Record, whatever, 3 years, right? Rook endgame progression, that's a beautiful thing we've got where you have to play a match against somebody to prove your rook endgame skills. That's every 2 years. And in general, all of the books are 3 years, right? So that's at the moment what we have, what we could be considered repetition. And I think in our heads, it was, at least in mine, it was like, well, these things have to be revisited. But if we wanted to get real serious about this, we could incorporate it into a quicker repetition in a lot of these factors.
It's not something we think about because it's like whenever I read a book, I don't think like, okay, now I have to reread this in 3 years. I just pick it up later eventually, maybe.
Yeah, we haven't like spaced out the repetitions very scientifically or anything either. I mean, we put obviously 1 year, 2 year, 3 year. There was some thought that went into it, right? But it's not like a very specific method. And also, a lot of these tasks start off with some repetition and then get refreshed, right? So, like opening sparring and endgame sparring, rook endgame match, those things, they start off in general with some repetitions before you can check them off. And then there's a big spacing, and then they can come back around. And also, you can avoid some of the repetitions. I think you can correct me if I'm expressing this wrongly, but you can avoid some of the repetitions by graduating. Where like if you go up some levels, some of these tasks won't come back around for you anymore.
Right.
So there's a kind of like proof in the pudding. I've reached a certain level. I don't need to redo some of these things anymore. I think, for example, that would apply to any of the books, right? Like once you're in the next level. Well, actually, there are some books that are assigned to more than one cohort.
Yeah.
But a lot of the books you would leave behind. And then some of the end games are spaced for like 3 or 4 bands, but then at some point they disappear. So you're not all going to have to practice again, rook checkmate or 2 bishop checkmate forever.
Yeah.
It makes sense. It's kind of a win-win. Like if you have to repeat some endgame that you've done before, it's like, okay, if you know it well, then it won't be hard. And then if you don't know it well, then it's good that you're repeating it. So I think, and then people can obviously intelligently decide, if they want to reread a certain book or if they want to work on something else. I think that's not like going to be, I don't think it's as critical when it comes to reading books that you have to reread the information. I think it can be very, very helpful. And there have definitely been books I've gone through like multiple times, but yeah, it's not like strictly necessary.
Yeah, I've occasionally looked at a book again. I didn't actually know that we'd put repetition in on the books, so I missed that update.
Oh yeah, books expire.
Buddy.
But it seems a little bit odd to me. Like I can't think of a lot of books where I would think there's a huge value in rereading the book compared to doing something new or some more, practical exercise, right? Some more sparring, practicing stuff.
Oh, I definitely think.
But Jesse, you want to maybe
I'll defend reading
explain
the
some of that?
Yeah. First of all, 3 years, is a pretty long time. And I would say like just taking the books that I have to read at the 2400 cohort, they're all very difficult. And there's a lot of a lot of ideas in there that I won't have understood the first time around, and revisiting them definitely worth it. Yeah. Um, I think any just let's forget about chess. If there's a good book out there, you should reread it. If it's not worth rereading, it's not a good book in the first place. That'll be my little tagline right there.
Okay.
Um,
It's a good
and that
one.
goes not, that's just not just chess. I think that applies to fiction, nonfiction, the whole thing. If it's really well written, rereading it is always a benefit. But of course, that kind of rereading is a little bit less than spaced repetition because a lot of chess books, let's say you read Alekine's New York 1924, great book. Um, there will be like some things about it, maybe that you'll pick up the second time, you'll see, but the spaced repetition in terms of a scientific idea of learning is more like there's patterns or concepts that need to be revisited, and that's not going to be the case for so much with books. So I think the repetition with books is not really about spaced repetition, right?
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, I feel like the rereading of books, like, okay, the 2400 level is very different than some other levels of chess, right?
mhm,
So there's like elements of stuff that's just so difficult that maybe you didn't get it, right? And another time through, you actually get it versus like you got it, but now you're repeating it so you don't forget it. Um, and then a lot of the chess books I've reread was more out of like pleasure. Like the thing is so beautiful that I enjoyed going back to it, and then I enjoyed it
right.
again, so I kept going some, you know?
Mhm.
Um,
And I want to say with the lower cohorts, let's just take as an example this great Everyone's First Chess Workbook by Giannatos. That's kind of like the big one at the beginning. If you haven't graduated out of that book, like if you're still stuck, and let's say it's 3 years there, do that book again for sure. That book's great, man. That book's
mhm.
great. That's like the basic tactics, finding like the hanging piece. Boom, boom, boom. Do it again and again and again for sure.
Yeah, I do think for the lower levels, it does make sense to read different books when it comes to not tactics necessarily, but just like strategy or like beginning game collections, like something like Chernev or something like that. I feel like it definitely helps to just like learn about different concepts, but from different authors. I definitely read about like different positional ideas, not just from Silman, but I also read like multiple books kind of covering the same topic before I really felt like I understood it well.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think there definitely is a benefit to seeing different um, perspectives, like seeing the same, even the same game, but being explained by like John Nunn or Dvoretsky or someone else. It
Mhm.
can be very useful.
Yeah. I mean, let's imagine somebody who is not graduating for 2 to 3 years from their
Mhm.
cohort, right?
Yeah.
And now let's imagine it's not something like 2300 or 2400 or something that's like, quite likely a final plateau or something like that, right? So let's say it's, it's 600 or 1600 or 1200, etc.
Mhm.
If they don't graduate after accomplishing all the tasks and they're 2 to 3 years into working through that cohort's task list, the odds are that somewhere along the way what they needed was some more like pluses to review their games and find like specific weaknesses and tell them this is what you should repeat more, right? Like you
Mhm.
need to like work on the end games more, or you need to work on the tactics more. Like I feel like it would be more targeted at that point than just start rereading all the books if possible, right? Like I feel like if it's really dragging, if we're talking years in a 100 point band,
Mhm.
um, then it's probably important to figure out what's holding this person back. What are the main 1 to 3 things? And then do more targeted work on that than just starting to repeat everything.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes sense when it comes to people that feel like they're really stuck or in a rut. It's funny, yeah. You said like 2 or 3 years. We definitely see people that they don't make progress for like a month, and they're like, "Guys, I'm stuck. I'm in
Yeah.
I
That's
just
That's
right.
because they
can't
have that
break."
expectation of speed from previous improvement,
Yeah,
right? Until like it's always going well until you get stuck. And then the first time you get stuck in chess, it's always like, whoa, like I thought I could just like learn stuff and keep going forever. But I gave that 2 to 3 years because that's sort of the scope of when Jesse was saying the books repeat. So I was just wondering what's the use of having an automated task that you reread the book in 3 years versus like, oh, you've been stuck for 24 months. Like,
Mhm.
let's trigger a thing where a plus reviews your games and gives you like
Mhm.
a couple of areas to work on and says like go back and redo all the endgame sparring for your level
Yeah,
and do the
but
endgame sparring for one level below you or something if that's truly like a problem, right?
I think there's something really useful in that, in that getting high rated players to review your games can really get a lot of people unstuck, and it can save a lot of grief if someone, because there are some like really common mistakes that a high rated player could just point out immediately, and then people wouldn't be like, imagine you're driving around with an orange in your exhaust pipe. Your car is like
Right.
struggling, and then high rate players comes and like pulls it out for you, and you're like, "Oh, I didn't know I could do that." And then all of a sudden,
Right.
it's just game changer.
Right. And you're like, I was doing spaced repetition on this like driver's manual, And the dude's like, your car is broken.
Exactly.
Now,
So
but
huge value in
yeah,
just getting regular reviews of your games.
Yeah.
one I want to say two quick things. So for one, we have it kind of built into the dojo that the idea of the top of the cohort show is that, me or one of you guys will go in, look at who's done a bunch of work but hasn't graduated yet.
Yeah.
And, you know, as time passes, we probably will have somebody stuck for 2 to 3 years. We've been doing this only a couple of years now, but the idea is precisely that, is that, okay, that's the time when I really want, me especially, I want to go in and think about their journey. And it's useful not only for them, but then for me to think about the program and like, what was it that wasn't happening for them to not make to the next level? The other thing that's real tricky about spaced repetition that I want to stress that I think is interesting is one common mantra you hear from high-rated players, I think like Ramesh has talked a little bit about this, and I agree with it, is that when you get to a higher level, you need to be doing endgame studies on the regular. And one of the interesting things about endgame studies is they will activate your system too in a really powerful way, i.e., if you don't like the hard ones, buddy, if you don't really go deep, you don't have any chance. Your first intuition is not correct, my friend. And so one of the things about that I think applies also to difficult books, very difficult book that I'm reading now. It's a book Kostya turned me on to. I'm doing this in the morning. Recognizing Your Opponent's Resources, dude, by Dvoretsky. Really difficult. I'm on my list of like one of the most difficult books ever. In any case, a lot of problems where you're like, you got to go really deep. Okay. So what am I driving at? That a chess player, especially when you get to a higher level, you must practice going into that system too. And you got to do it on the regular, right? So like every day. And the endgame study thing is just a way to force your mind to do some kind of deep work every day. And it's the ability then to think, to go deeper, that makes you a stronger player. And that's ultimately like that problem solving skill, kind of the heart of chess improvement. And it's not then the repetition of a particular pattern, though you might find particular patterns when you're doing this deeper work. It's also, and more importantly, I think, the repetition of expanding your ability to do system two thinking. So it's a kind of spaced repetition, if you will, because I will say from my personal experience, like if I'm dealing with a bunch of stuff in my mind that's like not deep, then I will come to the board in a more superficial way, and I won't be able to just simply immediately go into like a system to tank. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, we can't do spaced repetition for everything. Like we'd like to be able to just learn our openings, learn our end games, learn our positional ideas, learn our tactical patterns, and then show up to the board, and then we kind of know what to do in any situation. But no, chess is too deep for that, and there will always like, yeah, you have to also develop your analytical ability. I mean, it's just the absolute most important part. I agree. But spaced repetition, I think, okay, I mean, has yeah, it can't do everything for us, but it has a lot of, I feel like, yeah, it feels like it has a lot of useful benefits from it.
It's around trying to improve your memorization of like knowledge, right? Whereas this other stuff is more skills, right? So the skills and knowledge are always two different elements of your chess playing strength.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I feel they're interrelated,
Yeah, they're not in a vacuum, but I mean,
like I think actually a key disagreement that we have, Mr. Bruce, is you kind of think like, oh, if I saw it once, I got it. And I'm like, no, boss, those mates, buddy, I know you could eventually solve it, but we want it faster. And then the whole, metaphor that I think is so important with basic stuff like that is the mates are like the layups in basketball. Yes, you can make a layup, boss. I get it. But
mhm.
to make it efficiently and to make it like with a lot of nuance, because there's a lot of finger touch going on when you roll the ball off your fingers, uh, that's a skill, and it's a deep skill, and it's got to be again and again. And it's not something that any basketball player would be like, no, I don't need to do no layups, boss. You got to do your layups, bud. Got to do your free throws. It's got to get done. And I say, especially as an older dude, I think a lot of my, the chess quest is just relearning so much stuff and trying to deal with the loss. I'm losing stuff fast, dude. It's going
Mm.
away.
Yeah, I mean, it's honestly kind of hard. You got to learn your mates. I mean, you got to do your end games, obviously, and you got to study middle games. I mean, openings. It's too much, man.
You have to make some choices, right, about what you're repeating, and that's always the potential knock on the repeating. Is like it's your opportunity cost of what else you could have done with that time.
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
think also at Jesse, what he just said reminded me, about how it's going, reminded me of like a very other important other axis on which you can judge this, which is that how quickly you forget and what you forget changes over time for different people as well. Like
Hmm.
when I was younger, like when I was in high school, I guess, I think I remembered all my opening analysis that I had ever done, full stop, period.
Hmm. Hmm.
When I've been doing opening analysis for only 2 or 3 years, and I did it, on a board and talking to a friend, I don't even know if I wrote it down, much less reviewed
Right,
it. It's
right.
like I just like talked through the position with my friend. We like banged ideas off each other, and then I just knew it,
Yeah.
right? And I didn't repeat my games to remember them to be able to show someone else or model games. It was just like I knew every game I'd ever played OTB for several years, just
Right.
no repetition. And now, I can go over an opening line 1 week ago or something like that, and it can, or maybe a month ago, and it can already be gone. It can go so much faster, right? And so now, if I wanted to remember stuff, I think I would do more repetition to try and hold on to it. Um, But then we also haven't even broached the question of whether memorizing openings is like effective compared to something else you could do, right? Like maybe it's okay to just let yourself forget it all and focus on some other skill. We haven't said like what's the most
Mm.
efficient thing to do, right? Just if you wanted to memorize it, do you need repetitions?
Yeah. I also want to make the point that I feel like people often underestimate, which for me, and you guys can of course disagree, but I feel like the intensity of how someone is studying kind of directly correlates to how long they'll retain it for. And the more intense and focused someone is while they're working, the more likely is that stuff that they're working on will stick with them longer, whether it's end games, openings, or whatever. And I bring that up because I feel like it's not something to take for granted. A lot of people, they play chess on their phone, they study on their phone. They do this thing where they watch a YouTube video and then they study on their phone, and then the YouTube video like takes up a portion of their screen, so they don't even see the full screen of whatever they're working on because they're watching this video in the background. And then obviously they're multitasking, so it's super distracting. Like you can't get into like deep system 2 thinking when you're listening to someone talk. Even if you're listening to like music, I don't know, it could be distracting. So I think that's just a huge point that definitely goes unnoticed. Chessable, as much as I do love their company, I feel like they have a brilliant site. They have this like kind of like commercial slash like marketing campaign where it's like, oh, you can just study chess from your phone and you don't have to set up the position, and it's like super easy and convenient. But I feel like that actually can be harmful. I feel like there's actually benefit from when you're going through a book. You got to set up the positions yourself. You got to follow the variations. You got to keep track of where the pieces are. I think that's just also just helpful for like your visualization, your board vision, like all these kind of smaller skills that we don't really concretely work on. I mean, so many players grew up reading chess books, going through variations, having to figure out what's the position on the board, what's the position in the book, and I think that really develops a lot of your chess skills that you might then lose when it's kind of just like spoon fed to you super quickly with the spaced repetition.
I think Jesse and I both agree with you for sure, because that's why you have that hierarchy that you gave us before that Jesse agreed with earlier about why, like, playing an actual classical game, you're more likely to remember the details of your opening line than any of the other previous levels you gave. It's because very few people ever match outside of an OTB game the intensity that applies to their OTB games, right? And it's something that we look for and encourage, right? That you do your training work at a level that starts to approach that. But I've got lots of people who say, if I try to play a practice game with you outside of a tournament, I can never bring the same effort or level that I would bring at a tournament. I just can't play a good game, uh, just Thursday at 3 p.m.
It's
without a
not,
tournament.
yeah, it's not life or death.
Did you recently get mated? Well, then it's time to join the ChessDojo training program. Or maybe you just enjoy this fine content. Give us some money on the Patreon. I need to keep the lights on, and with inflation, it's really hard for Kostya to be buying that avocado toast. Cool. Well, we'll probably wrap it up soon. One thing I'll say that is interesting about this topic for the dojo is not only for the Rex, but we are hoping to develop like an openings interface, and we're kind of looking at it with, there's a whole tech question behind it. But then when we do it, the question will be like, how do we set it up in terms of the spaced repetition for learning the openings? How will we say, for example, the different cohorts should go about learning the openings and how much time and yada, yada. So I feel like this discussion for me personally concretized the notion that, right, this is a thing. This is a thing, and it needs to be applied within the dojo. And so how it eventually gets applied, we can discuss it and we'll fine tune it. Every year, I like what we do. We have a Dojo 3.0 is going to be in May, and that's kind of like when the fine tuning happens every year, May 1st. And so like next couple of months, we can think about a lot of these things with the repetition.
Yeah. I've got maybe like a final point
All right.
you guys could comment on or not. But of the different things that you could use space repetition for, right? Openings, tactics, end games, or something else like learning classic games or model games or middle game ideas. For me, the most useful right now seems to me to be end games out of all of those, because I feel like the skills that I'm gaining by repeating some of the end game sparrings and the patterns and stuff like that are going to apply more generally to my chess strength in more different positions. Whereas, forgetting, first of all, I don't really think I forget the tactical patterns, period. So, yeah, no, that's at the bottom for me, is like space repetition on tactics seems like 99% a waste of time. But then the space repetition on the openings, like I just don't think it's going to cost me the same amount as like my endgame skills. So if I have to choose where because as Jesse says, some of us are losing stuff really fast, and maybe we need more repetition, but we also need to make harder choices about where we put our time onto repetitions, because I also need to learn some new things and so forth, right? Um, so for me, if I were to put space repetition into my own personal program anywhere, I would put it most on my end games.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's a good question. And I think with the end games, it's cool that we have at the moment, you have to do it every year. I think that to me, that feels right, especially because each position really is 9 different matches. For me, just my personal experience has definitely been the Polgar Mate. So something I repeated, and I could tell that I got much better at it. And I definitely need to repeat it to keep the same level of instant pattern awareness. So that, in my personal experience, was the number one experience of, really getting something valuable by repeating it.
I'd probably go with endgames myself as well, in terms of what's been most helpful for me, like especially practicing certain theoretical endgames, practicing like how to win, how to mate with bishop and knight against the king. I just feel like that's super helpful. But I also think it's not to say that endgames are the most important. I feel like the way it works is actually that I feel like there's a certain number of endgames based on your level that are critical. If you know those, then beyond that, it's less critical. So, low rated player, I don't think has to be studying a lot of super advanced stuff. So if you know your kind of basic endgames down pat, and we have like a list for every level and so on, if you know those, then I think, yeah, your time is totally effective spent studying middle games, other stuff, classic games, and so on.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool.
Cool.
All right. Okay. Well, that wraps up. That was the I guess part 2 of the perpetual improvement series. Talked about a topic. It comes from Ben Johnson's book. Thanks everyone for listening. We will catch you guys next time.